The racist police officer, who had humiliated Muhammad Ali in 1975, was lying on the sidewalk, clutching his chest, dying of a heart attack. When he looked up and saw who was kneeling beside him, Detective Frank Sullivan couldn't believe his eyes. It was the man whose life he had tried to destroy 20 years earlier. What Ali did next would change both men forever. August 14, 1975. Detroit, Michigan. Muhammad Ali was walking to his car after a charity event at the Cobo Center when Detective Frank Sullivan approached him with two uniformed officers. Sullivan was 35 years old, a 12-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department, and he carried a hatred for Ali that went beyond professional duty. Sullivan had grown up on Detroit's East Side, son of Sergeant Michael Sullivan, who died in Korea in 1952, when Frank was 12. The flag that covered his father's coffin still sat folded in Frank's dresser drawer, along with the Purple Heart and letters his father had written but never sent. Letters about missing his son's baseball games, wanting to teach him to drive, dreams they would never share. When Muhammad Ali refused to fight in Vietnam, Sullivan felt something break inside his chest. His father had died fighting people he'd never met, in a country he'd never seen, because America called him to service. And here was this famous boxer, refusing to answer the same call because it wasn't convenient for his career. "Muhammad Ali, you're under arrest," Sullivan announced loudly, making sure the small crowd could hear every word. The charge was bogus, alleged assault on a photographer that had supposedly happened months earlier. No evidence, no witnesses, just an excuse for Sullivan to put Ali in handcuffs in front of as many people as possible. Sullivan had been planning this moment for months, waiting for Ali to return to Detroit, coordinating with colleagues who shared his feelings about the draft dodger who had gotten rich while real men died. As he cuffed Ali's hands behind his back, Sullivan felt a surge of satisfaction he hadn't experienced since his father's funeral. But Ali didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't give Sullivan the confrontation he had been hoping for. Instead, Ali looked directly into Sullivan's eyes and said quietly, "Officer, I don't know what this is about, but I'll come with you peacefully. There's no need for anger." As Sullivan put Ali into the police car, he leaned in close and whispered words that would haunt both men for decades. "You're nothing but a loudmouth coward who ran from his country when real men were dying. My father died in Korea so America could be free, and you spit on his grave every time you open your mouth." Ali turned to look at Sullivan through the metal mesh. For a moment their eyes met, and Sullivan saw something he wasn't prepared for. Not anger or fear, but sadness. Deep, genuine sadness for the pain that Sullivan was carrying. "I'm sorry about your father," Ali said quietly as the car pulled away. Losing a parent is the hardest thing anyone can face. The words hit Sullivan like a physical blow. He had expected Ali to curse him, to threaten him, to prove he was the arrogant celebrity Sullivan believed him to be. Instead, Ali had offered sympathy for a loss he couldn't possibly have known about. The charges would be dropped within 24 hours. There had never been any assault. The photographer didn't exist. But for Sullivan, putting Ali in that police car was worth whatever consequences followed. Sullivan was suspended without pay for a month, nearly lost his job, and was transferred to traffic duty. But he considered it a victory. He had humiliated Muhammad Ali. What Sullivan didn't know was that Ali had spent the night in jail thinking about the pain he'd seen in the detective's eyes. The next morning, Ali asked his lawyer to find out everything about Detective Frank Sullivan. What he learned broke his heart. For 20 years, Sullivan carried that anger like a stone in his chest. He would tell anyone who would listen about the day he arrested Muhammad Ali. The story became Sullivan's defining moment, the thing that made him feel important in a life that had delivered very little importance. But success in humiliating Ali didn't bring Sullivan peace. His wife left him in 1978, taking their 2 children to California. Tired of living with a man consumed by anger, Sullivan's drinking increased. His job performance declined. His fellow officers began avoiding him, recognizing the signs of a man whose bitterness was destroying him. February 7, 1995. 20 years later, Sullivan was 55 years old, overweight, divorced, walking to his car after his shift when crushing pain hit his chest like a sledgehammer. He collapsed on the sidewalk outside Detroit Police Headquarters, gasping for air, his left arm going numb, his vision blurring. Heart attack, massive, possibly fatal. Through the haze of pain, Sullivan saw someone running toward him. A large man, moving with surprising grace. As the figure got closer, Sullivan's failing vision focused enough to recognize a face he hadn't seen in person for 2 decades. Muhammad Ali, now 53 years old, his hands already showing the tremor of Parkinson's disease, was kneeling beside the man who had arrested him out of hatred. "Call 911, Ali shouted to the gathering crowd. Then he looked down at Sullivan, whose eyes were wide with shock and recognition. "It's going to be okay," Ali said gently, his voice already slightly slurred by the disease that was slowly taking him. "Just stay calm. Help is coming." Sullivan tried to speak, but the pain was too intense. His mind raced with confusion and disbelief. Of all the people in Detroit who could have found him dying on this sidewalk, why did it have to be Muhammad Ali? The man he had humiliated, arrested, hated for 2 decades was now the only thing standing between him and death. Ali seemed to understand his struggle. "Don't try to talk," Ali said, loosening Sullivan's tie and collar with hands that shook slightly. "I know who you are. Detective Sullivan, August 1975. I remember everything." For a moment Sullivan was sure Ali would leave. This was perfect karma. Instead, Ali stayed. He held Sullivan's hand while they waited for the ambulance, his own trembling fingers somehow providing strength. He talked in a calm, steady voice, keeping him conscious and fighting. "Stay with me, detective," Ali said as sirens grew louder. "You've got people who need you. Your daughter Jennifer, she's in college now, right? Pre-med at Wayne State. She needs her father to be proud of her graduation." Sullivan's eyes widened in shock. How could Ali possibly know about Jennifer? But there was no time for questions. The paramedics arrived, and Ali stepped back to give them room to work, though he stayed close enough for Sullivan to see him. Ali rode with Sullivan in the ambulance, continuing to talk to him, sharing stories about his own health struggles, about the fear of facing mortality, about the importance of fighting even when odds seemed impossible. When they reached the hospital, Ali waited while doctors worked to save Sullivan's life. In the emergency room, Ali sat in the waiting area for 3 hours. When Sullivan's ex-wife Margaret arrived, frantic and crying, Ali introduced himself and explained what had happened. Margaret recognized Ali immediately. Her first reaction confusion. "Why are you here?" she asked, not rudely, but genuinely puzzled. "Frank never spoke kindly about you. Why would you help him?" Ali's response was simple. "Because he needed help, and I was there to give it. Sometimes that's enough." When Sullivan's teenage daughter Jennifer came running through the corridors, Ali was there to comfort her, to tell her that her father was strong and fighting. He stayed with the family through the night, arranging for the best cardiac specialist to consult on Sullivan's case. When Sullivan was stable and conscious, Ali finally went to his room. Sullivan was connected to monitors and tubes, looking old and fragile. When he saw Ali enter, tears started flowing down his face. "Why?" Sullivan asked, his voice weak but clear. "After what I did to you, why did you help me?" Ali sat down beside Sullivan's bed, his movements careful. His hands were shaking slightly. "Because that's what human beings do for each other," Ali said simply. "Because 20 years ago you were angry, and you made a mistake. That doesn't mean you deserve to die on a sidewalk." Sullivan closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't felt in decades. For 2 decades he had carried his hatred for Ali, like a badge of honor. Now faced with Ali's unexpected kindness, that hatred felt like a weight crushing him. "I was wrong," Sullivan whispered. "Everything I believed about you was wrong." Ali shook his head gently. "You believed what you needed to believe. Your daddy died in Korea. That's hard to carry. When I refused to go to Vietnam, it probably felt like I was disrespecting his sacrifice." Sullivan's eyes opened, shocked that Ali understood the source of his anger so clearly. "How did you know about my father?" "I looked you up after that day in 1975, Ali admitted. "I wanted to understand why you hated me so much. When I learned about your dad, about how he died when you were just a kid, it made sense. You weren't just a racist cop. You were a son who missed his father and couldn't understand why someone would refuse to serve when your father had died serving." They talked for 2 hours. Sullivan told Ali about growing up without a father, about the anger he'd carried his whole life and how it had poisoned his marriage and relationships. Ali listened without judgment, occasionally sharing his own stories about making difficult choices and living with consequences. "I kept that flag from his coffin," Sullivan said quietly. "For 40 years I've kept it in my dresser drawer, and every time I looked at it I thought about how he died for freedom, and how you had thrown that freedom away." Ali was quiet for a moment, his trembling hands folded. "Your father didn't die for my freedom to serve in the military," he said finally. "He died for my freedom to choose not to serve. That's what freedom means. The right to make choices, even when other people think those choices are wrong." When visiting hours ended, Ali stood to leave. Sullivan grabbed his arm. "Will you come back?" he asked. I mean, if you have time, I'd like to talk more. Ali smiled, that famous Ali smile. I'll come back, he promised, and he did. The next day, Ali returned with a gift, a small framed photograph of soldiers raising the American flag, with an inscription that read, "To Detective Sullivan, your father's service mattered. His sacrifice was real. Thank you for helping me understand. Muhammad Ali." For the next 10 years, Muhammad Ali and Frank Sullivan maintained an unlikely friendship that neither man discussed publicly. Ali would visit Sullivan at his small Detroit apartment, bringing groceries when Sullivan struggled financially, talking about boxing and life and growing older. Sullivan would drive Ali to doctor's appointments when Parkinson's made it difficult, helping him with daily tasks that were becoming harder. He became one of the few people who could understand Ali's increasingly slurred speech. In 1997, when Sullivan's daughter Jennifer graduated from medical school, Ali attended the ceremony. He sat in the back, unannounced, watching as the daughter of a man who had once arrested him became Dr. Jennifer Sullivan. After the ceremony, Sullivan introduced Ali to Jennifer as one of my dearest friends. They never talked publicly about their friendship. Sullivan's fellow officers wouldn't have understood how their colleague had become friends with the man he'd once arrested out of racial hatred. Ali's entourage wouldn't have understood why the champion was spending time with a racist ex-cop. But in private, they found a connection that transcended their history. Sullivan helped Ali understand the perspective of people who had hated him, families who had seen his refusal to serve as betrayal of everything their loved ones had died for. Ali helped Sullivan understand that courage comes in many forms, that standing up for beliefs sometimes means standing alone against the entire world. In 1999, when Ali received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Sullivan was watching on television from his apartment. When the camera showed Ali's trembling hands as he received the medal, Sullivan found himself crying, not for the man he had once hated, but for his friend who was facing his toughest fight. In 2002, when Sullivan's daughter Jennifer got married, Ali sent a handwritten note of congratulation. It was one of the last letters he would write before his handwriting became too affected by Parkinson's. The note read, "Your father is the proudest man in Michigan today. Congratulations on finding love. Muhammad Ali." Sullivan framed that letter. Frank Sullivan died of complications from diabetes on March 18, 2005. At his funeral there was an unexpected guest. Muhammad Ali, now 63, and visibly affected by Parkinson's, sat in the back row of the small Detroit church. He didn't speak to other mourners, didn't give interviews to local reporters who recognized him. He just sat there paying respects to a friend who had started as an enemy. After the service, Sullivan's daughter Jennifer approached Ali. She thanked him for coming, and for being her father's friend during his final years. "He changed because of you," she told Ali. "He spent the last 10 years of his life trying to be the man he thought you deserved as a friend." Ali's response was barely audible due to his condition, but Jennifer heard it clearly. "He changed himself. I just gave him permission to do it." The story of Muhammad Ali and Frank Sullivan reminds us that redemption is possible even after the worst mistakes. That hatred can be transformed into understanding. That enemies can become friends if they have the courage to see past their anger to the human being underneath. Sullivan never spoke publicly about his friendship with Ali, and Ali never mentioned their relationship in interviews. Some bonds are too precious, too unlikely, too sacred to share with the world. But those who knew both men saw the change in Sullivan, saw how his friendship with Ali had given him peace with his father's memory. Today, a small plaque sits in the Detroit Police Memorial Garden, placed there by Jennifer Sullivan in honor of her father. It doesn't mention Muhammad Ali by name, but its message would have made both men smile. Forgiveness is the highest form of courage. It's signed simply FS 1940 to 2005. In the end, Frank Sullivan learned what Muhammad Ali had always known. That being the greatest isn't about proving you're right. It's about having the strength to admit when you're wrong, and the wisdom to choose love over hate, understanding over anger, friendship over revenge.